In this edition of the Red and Blue Political Roundup, President Trump went on the offensive on Twitter this weekend. The president attacked everything from special counsel Robert Mueller and General Motors to CNN, Hillary Clinton, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the late Senator John McCain. The presidential tweet storm came after the New Zealand mosque shootings Friday, when a reporter asked Mr. Trump if he sees white nationalism as a rising threat around the world.
I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet.
This weekend, White House officials appeared to defend the president's response to the attacks. Here's Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney on Sunday's Face the Nation.
Donald Trump is no more to blame for what happened in New Zealand than Mark Zuckerberg is, because he invented Facebook. There are some terrible people in the world. We need to work with our partners, of which New Zealand is one of them, to try and figure a way to find them, expose them, and bring them to justice.
Joining me now from Washington is Hunter Walker. He's a White House correspondent for Yahoo News. So, Hunter, what more are you hearing from the White House on this?
Well, you saw Mick Mulvaney go on TV this weekend and say, you know, the president is not a white supremacist. And I don't know how many times we have to say that. And, you know, it was really interesting because they do keep having to say it a lot, because he does keep seeming to, you know, not denounce these guys. And these guys keep emerging and seeming inspired by him. I mean, the internet is just filled with these alt-right Pepe frogs wearing MAGA hats. And then Kellyanne Conway kind of added fuel to the fire this morning when she said, you know, people should read this New Zealand Shooters Manifesto in its, quote, entirety.
And you asked her about that, Hunter. What was her reasoning for that?
Yeah, and she implied that it was sort of more media criticism than anything else. She said, you know, this is more for you than anyone else, implying you and I, you know. And what she was saying is that she was talking about people who would, quote unquote, cherry pick a line here or there from the manifesto to get Donald Trump in trouble. And her main argument is that, you know, the shooter only mentioned President Trump once, when he called him basically a model of white identity. And, you know, the shooter had so much else to say, is her point. But at the same time, she can't really get around the fact that the shooter did praise President Trump, and she did direct people to read this manifesto that many other people are actively trying to suppress.
Right. On another note, the president also lashed out at the late Senator John McCain for providing the Steele dossier to the FBI. President Trump is facing backlash for that tweet from within his own party. Let's listen to South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham.
John McCain is an American hero. He stepped forward to serve his nation. He risked his life. He spent 5.5 years in horrendous conditions as a prisoner of war. He's one of the most consequential senators in the history of the body. Nothing will ever change that. When he received the dossier, he turned it over to the FBI. It's what he should have done. He didn't turn it over to the press. Other people did. So he's my friend. I told President Trump that when it comes to John McCain, I think he acted responsibly. He's an American hero, and nothing will ever change that in my eyes. I want to help this president. I want him to be successful. I'll help him where I can, but push back when I need to. When it comes to criticizing Senator McCain and his service, I think that's a huge mistake.
So, Hunter, are you getting any sense that the White House is concerned about political fallout from the president's tweets?
I mean, the line is just constant from the White House for 2 years now. You know, the tweets speak for themselves. I think you really never see anyone on the current White House staff, and obviously, you know, with the historic turnover, there's this whole universe of former staffers, but you never see anyone on the current staff question the president's tweets. It's clearly something very close to him. At the same time, I'm not sure we've ever seen a stretch like this past 3 or 4 days where he just seemed to tweet nonstop on such a variety of topics, as you were pointing out. I mean, I was trying to get a full count of you know, even just the past 24 hours, and it was almost overloading my phone as I was sitting here prepping. So, you know, this is really an unprecedented Twitter cyclone from the president.
Right. And our Major Garrett, you know, did the math and tallied it up and said this is one of the biggest tweet storms of the Trump presidency. But is there any indication about the timing? Why now?
Well, one thing I've heard is that, we didn't see him go golfing this weekend. And often when he is in Washington, D.C., they don't always say that he's golfing, but he makes one of these mysterious visits to his golf club where he seems to hang out just enough time to get a couple rounds in. And it was a little too cold for golf this weekend, and he had nothing else on the calendar. So this was a weekend where he wasn't at Mar-a-Lago, he wasn't on the golf course, and, every impression is that he was cooped up in the residence just, letting loose on Twitter.
And letting loose, the president also weighed in on the 2020 Democratic presidential field. He attacked Joe Biden, who has not yet announced his campaign, over an apparent slip of the tongue that Biden made during an event on Saturday. Let's listen to that.
The most progressive record of anybody running for the if anybody who would run. I didn't mean. Than anybody who would run.
So, Hunter, the president has said in the past he would love to take on Biden. Is there a sense in the White House that that is still true?
I mean, you'll never hear one candidate say they're scared of anyone else. And if you talk to the people close to Vice President Biden, they all say that, one of his arguments for flirting with or if you watch that clip, maybe already jumping into the race, is that, he feels he's the one who has the best chance of beating Donald Trump. So I think they're both sort of beating their chests at each other right now.
Well, finally, former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke raised more than $6.1 million in the first 24 hours since announcing his run. That's the most for any Democratic candidate in the same time period. How much does that matter, though, this early on?
Well, Beto's always been a bit of a fundraising powerhouse. I mean, he's coming off that Senate campaign where he didn't defeat Ted Cruz, but he did pull in a historic fundraising haul. So he's clearly going to have a lot of money to play with. But, this is a giant field, and we are seeing a lot of people pull in seven-figure sums so far. So I'm not really certain that any of the distance between him and some of his rivals matters that much, because effectively right now we know everyone is going to have enough money to compete in the first early states. And we know the field is gigantic and it's going to stretch far beyond that. So I think, a win in the first couple states on the calendar or a high-ranking finish is all that matters here. And they all have enough cash for that.
All right, Hunter Walker in Washington. Hunter, thanks so much. Always good to see you.
Thanks for having me.